Welcome to Bridging Chicago, a podcast that aims to connect our listeners to Chicago's business, community, cultural, and charity leaders. Brought to you by the SATC Solutions Center. You can connect with us on Instagram or Twitter, where our handle is @BridgingChicago. For more information, including our email, visit us online at satcsolutions.com. Be sure to rate and subscribe to Bridging Chicago on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. I'm Nathan, your host for today's episode, and I'm so excited to be joined by Theresa Goodrich, who I don't even know exactly what to say you are because you're a lot of things, but I will say that you're an author because we're going to talk about your book today. And you have quite a few of them, but we're going to talk about your book, Living Landmarks of Chicago, because obviously it's one that a lot of our listeners will be really interested in. And so make sure that you stay tuned for this episode through the whole thing because Theresa's great. And I have a feeling we're going to learn a lot from you today. So thank you for joining us, Theresa.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I have to start with where you kind of started with in your introduction. I read your bio, and it's funny because you say, I've been telling people where to go since I was a little girl. And I have to say, I have not seen another intro like that before. So share with me what you mean by that. And because I feel like that has a lot to do with your story as well.
Well, my job now, I own a site called The Local Tourist, and that's all about helping people figure out where to go and what to do. And then last March, I also launched Your Chicago Guide. And so I like to joke that when people say, what's your elevator speech? And it's like, well, I tell people where to go. So that's what I do. That's my job. I tell people where to go. So put a little spin on it. But I've always been like, oh, I want to go see this and I want to go see that. So that's why I said I started at a very young age with, I wouldn't say I'm bossy, but
we don't like the term bossy because you're just authoritative and you're confident. And I think
right,
that's great.
right. Yeah, I've
Unfortunately,
been,
unfortunately, little girls used to be told they're bossy, and it's just fine to be confident.
yeah. And I was like, I saw horsies. I want to see the horsies. That's just we're gonna go see that. So that's the way it was.
But now that has obviously influenced a lot of what you do, and as you said, telling people where to go, and really meaning like giving people highlights of what's around them. We live in a city where Chicago has so many things to see and do, and yet I talk to people and they're like, "Oh, I've never been to this thing and I've never been to that thing." And I'm like, "Wow, even in our own city,
Yeah.
there's always so much adventure to go on." Can you remember in your childhood, was adventure a part of your growing up as a little girl?
Yes, it's my dad was an artist, and so I grew up going to art fairs during the summer. And so those were our vacations, but
Hmm.
it was fantastic because we just pile up into the back of the van and, go on our road trips, to Denver, or he exhibited at Disney, or Lafayette, Indiana.
Wow.
Those were our vacations for the most part. But it was fantastic because we got to see the country through the windows, and then, of course, meeting all these artists was fantastic. So it was a wonderful childhood. But then when we were at home, when he didn't have art fairs, and we just go on Sunday drives. And I don't know if people do that much anymore, but we'd go for a Sunday drive, and we'd go hiking at local parks, or, whatever nearby park mom and dad could find where we could go hiking.
Yeah.
So it was just, they wanted to get out and do things all the time. And so I think that influenced me. And then my grandmother loved to travel and loved road trips. So I came by it genetically, I think.
I have a couple questions in that because I find it really interesting that your family were artists and really focused on art, because I feel like that's not the norm really in society,
Mhm.
where a lot of families and not that one is right over the other, but it's like, focus on your studies, focus on learning, the science and the math and those
Yeah.
kind of subjects, where art is underfunded in a lot of places and,
Mhm.
unappreciated probably in a lot of places. So for you, how, like, did you see that in other people? Like, did you see them really getting the same creative freedom at that age and really learning a lot of the arts like you were, or did you kind of understand that was different?
I understood that it was different, especially my parents met at music school, Indiana University School of Music. Dad was a trombone performance major, and my mom went for clarinet. And so they had that musical background. And I did understand that that was a little different, especially growing up in, I grew up in Terre Haute, Indiana,
Mhm.
and that was definitely more of a focus on sports and more the STEM. But
Mhm.
then that's where I started playing clarinet. And then when we went to high school, mom actually became an accountant. So dad was the artist, and mom became an accountant. She could be a CPA and a CIA, which is certified internal auditor. So it's like
Okay.
my mom's in the CIA.
Yeah.
Uh, so she ended up getting hired by a company in Indianapolis when I was getting ready to start high school, and they chose to move to Carmel, Indiana, because specifically because of the music program, because they knew that I love clarinet. And so that's I knew that was unique, you know,
Yeah.
or maybe not unique, but it wasn't common.
Right. And then did you feel like being able to express yourself creatively help you in other areas of study, even in those science and engineering and math portions, or even just in like
Mhm.
critical thinking areas? Did you feel like that really helped fuel that as well?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think that just having that whole liberal arts education makes you so much more well-rounded, and it fuels your curiosity so that you're more interested. It's like, well, if you don't understand how something works, then you have this curiosity. It's like, well, why how does it work? Why does it work that way? It's like when I see let's speak bridging Chicago, see the bascule bridges downtown. It's like, how does that counterweight work? And how does it was just I feel like having that kind of that more um wanting to learn either through music or writing, which was has always been another passion of it's been the core passion of mine.
Yeah.
Just kind of fueled my curiosity for everything else.
I wanted to talk about your writing because obviously it's part of what you do now, but it's also what you studied in college. And for a lot of people, figuring out what to study can be anxious making. It can be nerve wracking because it's like you're 17 or 18 years old, or maybe older now, and you're trying to figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life. But for you, it seems like that passion was already there. So is that the case? And if it was college what you expected it to be, or did you kind of learn a lot about yourself and about what your passions were at the time?
Well, let's just say I went a non-traditional route. And no, I mean, I knew when I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to travel the country and tell stories. I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. And I kind of lost the idea that that could actually be my profession, what I want to do. And when I started playing clarinet, and I just fell in love with it. And because we moved to Carmel and had such a great music program, I ended up following in my mom's footsteps and went to Indiana University for
Mhm.
clarinet performance. But I was there for one semester, and I thought, this isn't what I want to do with my life, because I realized very quickly that to be a professional performer, especially in classical music, then you have to, I would have had to eat, breathe, sleep with, clarinet.
Right.
That's all it was. And that's not what I envisioned my life to be. And for a brief time, I thought I wanted to be an attorney because mom told me that nobody could ever win an argument with me. So I was like, she's like, you should be a lawyer because nobody can ever win an argument with you. And I was like, "Okay." So I thought about that for a little bit, and I ended up getting married when I was 20, left college, and then I didn't go back to college until a few years later. And then I went to Indiana University in Indianapolis, and that's when I
Mm.
went back for journalism because that time away, and I have a tendency, I was like, oh, these bright, shiny objects. It's like, well, I was really good at clarinet, so I could be a professional clarinetist. And I'm, really good at making a case. So I could be an attorney. And I had all these ideas. So, but then I realized writing was, and I knew it all along, but writing is my passion. It's who I am. That's what I do. That's what I do and who I am. So that's when I went back to college, and um, so finally graduated in 1999 with my degree in, well, yeah, it was 1999 with my degree in journalism. And at first I thought I was going to be an investigative journalist because I had a favorite professor, and she was covering the war in Zagreb in Croatia, and she would come back to class and tell us. And so she was just this very passionate person. She just wanted to right the world's wrongs. And but as a journalist, she was doing it by telling the stories of people who couldn't tell it themselves. And I thought that's what direction I was going to take. And then I realized that there's a lot of negativity in the world. And even though that's important, so vital to have people who are telling those stories, I wanted to be more of a spread joy and happiness. And so took a while to figure
Mm.
out how to make that happen.
Yeah, and you mentioned what you do and who you are.
Hmm.
And I think in some cases, those can be separate, those can kind of marry together. And can you maybe explain a little bit about what you meant by that? Because I find that really interesting because some people would say like what I do is not who I am. And some people would say, that that's very much one and the same. And so can you just share with us what that means to you, and sort of if you feel like what you do isn't who you are, is that okay? And how do you kind of bring all that together?
Hmm. I'll answer the last part of that first because I think it's absolutely okay. In fact,
Mhm.
sometimes knowing that I won't feel complete unless I am writing, unless I'm telling stories. And that can be, in a way, it's not a burden, it's also freeing, but it's also a commitment. And it's also very hard for me to take any time off at all. It means I'm a workaholic. And every time we go somewhere, I'm like, oh, I want to write about this. It's like so my job is also my life, and in many ways that is just incredibly fulfilling. But in other ways, it does take over. So I've had to develop hobbies like cooking because that's away from the computer, and that's just something where I can be creative, but it's not my job,
Yeah, yeah,
But I think that it's, you know, no, you don't have to be like that. You're not missing out on anything if you don't have that. This is who I am. I It's just something that my dad's an artist, and for him it's whatever his mediums change. I mean, he officially retired, so now he's doing model trains in his studio, model railroad, but it's not, I mean, everything is meticulous, and he's building his own sets, and because he's an artist and that's just who he is, and so he can't
yeah,
not be an artist. No.
yeah.
And mom's like, can you just sit and read for a little bit? He's like, nope, nope.
It's like, why did you retire?
Yeah.
You're still working.
Mm.
um, One of the things that I have learned from a lot of people that kind of keeps them from doing something that they're really passionate about is fear. And I think we all feel it at different times, where we fear, will we be able to feed ourselves, feed our families?
Mhm.
Will we be able to contribute to society in a certain way? Will we be able to leave a lasting impression and to help people that, in the way that we think, will people understand what we're doing? Will they get with it? Will they connect with it? And it's one of the things that even when we started this podcast, we had to figure out, okay, what's the story we're trying to tell? Will people listen to it? Will it be worth the time?
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of times we say maybe, or we say no, and we say I don't know, and so we don't go for it. But for you, how do you face that fear and say, I'm not going to worry about the outcome today. I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to believe that regardless of if 10 people read my book or a million people read my book, it was something that was worthwhile.
It's I give myself pep talks pretty much every day.
Mhm.
So that's um I had gotten away from writing. I created the site The Local Tourist as a vehicle to hopefully figure out how I was going to write for myself, because I knew I didn't want to work for a paper, and I knew I wanted to write for myself. And so I made choices based on that. So I waited tables in downtown Chicago for my first several years after moving here, and that paid the bills, but that enabled me to figure out how I was going to, make this dream come true, that I could write for myself. And even when I stopped waiting tables, I mean, I struggled, and I don't have that job security, because I don't have a consistent, this consistent salary that comes, or the benefits that come with it. But the trade-off for me is non-negotiable. At this point, I feel like I'm unemployable because it's like I know this is what I'm supposed to do, but there is definitely a trade-off. There's the working on the weekends. There's the, working basically all the time. But when you love what you do, it's not work, right? As I
Yeah,
say.
yeah,
But how do I get through those fears? Around in 2016, I was on we were celebrating, my husband and I were celebrating our 1 year anniversary when we went camping, and I'm an early riser. And so I got up and I just decided, you know what, I haven't written in my journal in years, and it used to be kind of my lifeline. um,
yeah,
but I stopped doing that, and I realized what I was doing with my work with the local tourist. Everything, I was just an admin. I was just managing events, and I had a team of contributors, and I was just managing them, and I wasn't actually doing what I was supposed to be doing. I wasn't actually writing. And so I just began writing in my journal, and it was physically difficult because it had been so long since I'd written, that I had to train myself not only to think differently by putting pen to paper, but also how my, the physical act of writing and putting pen to paper.
yeah.
But I mean, it was like riding a bike. I mean, it's not that it was hard, it just the thoughts didn't flow as well. But that became a daily habit. And it's still to this day. The first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I go to my journal and I write. And a lot of times it may start off with, okay, I'm so frustrated. I've got this, that, and the other. And by the time I'm done, I'm like, you know what? You've got this. You can do this. And I, shortly after I started this journaling practice, I put on an index card, I am a talented and incredible storyteller, and people love hearing my stories. And I inspire them to travel and explore through my words and images. And so I just put that in an index card, and I put it next to my computer, and it's still there to this day. And I every now and then, when I feel a little bit of fear or doubt, I just look at that and I'll say it out loud. I'll write it out again and I'll say it out loud, and it's like, I have got this. So that's
I think journaling is really important to me as well. I learned so much about myself doing that.
yeah,
Um, but I know a lot of people who struggle to find a creative outlet, who say they're not creative people. And even even before I started joining the podcast, I wouldn't have said I was a creative type, but
mhm,
I've learned through doing this that obviously this is a form of creativity. And so
yeah,
doing interviews and sort of all the marketing stuff that we do with the podcast is definitely a creative aspect. But for people who struggle to find their creative voice, because I think it does add a ton of value to life
yeah.
to be creative. And so maybe even for like the person who works in a laboratory, or someone who just doesn't think of themselves as a creative person, are there exercises that people can do to sort of help bring that out, or is there anything that you can suggest that would help people who don't see that in their own lives to
Mhm.
see that yes, you are creative, you just do it in a different way?
Yeah, and I do. It's so interesting you said that, because everybody is creative in their own way, and like even my mom insists, as the CPA, that she's not a creative accountant. She doesn't do creative. But
No creative
she,
bookkeeping.
right. But because of the way she sees the figures and analyzes the processes in businesses, when and she would visit, that is its own type of creativity. And a lot of people may not see that, but she does. And I watching her taught me that yes, everybody uh, is creative in their own way. Finding it, it's the only thing I could recommend would be just experiment. I mean, if you see a class for something, maybe it's a cooking class, maybe it's a basket weaving class. And I know that's kind of a cliche, but I actually have a friend who does take basket weaving classes, and she loves it. So, I mean, I think that's why adult coloring books are all the rage now, because
Yeah.
they force you to stop. You're not doing anything except, coloring, and whether you choose to color within the lines, or use the color that you're supposed to use, or go a little crazy. That's entirely up to you. Puzzles, I think that's another thing. They're so popular now too, and I think it's because it's one, it causes you to focus, and it takes you out of everything that's happening outside of just what's right in front of you. And I think that those are both such wonderful ways to enhance that creativity, and to find it in the first place.
Yeah. And given what we've all been through in the last year and a half, a lot of values have shifted in a lot of people's households. And so, with that, we see people worrying less about the things like they used to worry about,
Hmm.
advancing their careers, maybe, or like getting the next best thing, and focusing really more on the people who matter to you, your family, and things like that. So, with this, with everything that's happened in this last year and a half, has that, as you've reflected on your life and as you've kind of made the same shift as we've all made, has that changed the way that you look at work or creativity? And if it has, which I'm guessing it has because it's changed so many things. What is that change? And then how did you kind of come about facing it, accepting it, and like integrating that into your life moving forward?
No. Um, well, in addition to the global health concerns, I also had my own, because last August I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So that gut punch really had me step back and think, what is my dream life? What do I want my life to be? How do I want to spend my time? Who do I want to spend my time with? And just thinking, um, so it really, I mean, for a long time, I couldn't really work. I could write, but it was more just personal journaling. And and I'm still writing about my experience with dealing with cancer. Uh,
Hmm.
and it's really brought me down to my core and what matters to me most. And that's why I don't know if a year and a half ago I would have said writing is who I am. I didn't define it that closely, and didn't define myself in that way. But as I went down to my bare bones and thought, okay, and sorry,
No, you're all right.
if when you're confronted with something like that, when you're confronted with your own mortality, and fortunately, mine was found very early, and I've already completed treatment. Except, I mean, I'm on a medication for the next 5 years, but chemo's done, radiation's done. And it happened within 10 and a half months. So, relatively speaking, that's very fast.
Mm-hmm.
But my chance of survival was always very, very high because of when we caught it and the kind of cancer it was. But it's still that, like, you know what? You don't know. You could just be going for some routine test and find out, oh, something that you've got this life-threatening disease. And in the last year and a half, we found a couple of friends have had stage 4 colon cancer, and they are literally fighting for their lives. And so watching them and um, how they're navigating their own experience and the struggles that they've had, which are just so much, you know, there's no comparison because everybody has to deal with it in their own way. But I feel very fortunate that mine was so relatively easy to deal with. But it does make you look at what is important, and it's family and friends and, being, I mean, it made me look at my writing. It's like, what do I bring to the world by writing? Is that, like, to go back to an earlier question about how does that impact? What you do? How does it impact other people? And so that's something that I'm definitely considering now. And when I write, it's like, okay, I'm a storyteller. I've specialized in nonfiction and bringing destinations to life. And I realize that what it comes down to for me is helping people create memories. That's through my travel writing. And then with living landmarks, it's more about, it's telling the stories of the people who made this city. So it's taking this three-dimensional uh, world, this building that you see, and turning it into something that's more four-dimensional. There's more character to it, and you learn why it was. And I'm not trying to, just jump into promoting the book or anything. I'm very passionate about it, about being able to tell these stories, that it's not that, and I feel like that is what I'm supposed to do, is
Yeah.
like, because it's more than just, here's a story about a building, or here's a story about a river or a park. It comes down to, when somebody reads that, are they transformed? Do they then feel this sense of wonder? So that's what I want to bring to the world, is this sense of joy and a sense of wonder and curiosity, and like we talked about, how that curiosity helps foster your own creativity. And when you feel that curiosity, then you're more connected to others and to the world around you. So it just snowballs.
Yeah. And I did want to talk about the book, and you actually mentioned what I wanted to talk about, because it's one thing to say, okay, here's a landmark, here's why they built it, here's when they built it,
Mm,
you know, and to kind of leave it at that. And Chicago is obviously a great city if you want to talk about architecture or history or landmarks. Um, but in your book, it's so much more than just here's a landmark, here's why it's here. And I think it's one of those things where, a lot of people don't see that as interesting all the time or as fun. Um, but I think you really bring out the spirit of not just the landmark, but the spirit of the city, and sort of
mm,
why the city is such a vibrant, uh, diverse, dynamic city. And I mean, storytelling is certainly a gift, and it's one that you obviously not only have you honed, but you've shared it with everyone, and I think that's great. Um, but can you tell me how you have seen other people connect with that, and do you see them? Because I've seen when we have guests come on, and we'll ask them a question about something, a part of their story, and they just kind of like, oh wow, I didn't think you were going to ask me that. I'm so glad I get to share that with
mm,
people. People want to share their story. People want to connect with others. They want,
mm,
to give people that little nugget of information that they've learned. They want to help people be their best self. And I think in the same way that you're sharing the story of landmarks and of these these lessons that you've learned, and soon we'll be sharing the story of your fight with breast cancer, it's more than just telling the facts of what happened. It's truly sharing a story, and it's truly a gift. So have you seen people really connect with that and understand it for what it is?
Yes, yeah. I've heard that, just knowing, because these aren't just buildings. They didn't just appear out of thin air. People
Yeah.
made that happen. And they made it happen often through overcoming so many obstacles. And I've heard
Mm.
the stories of, I had no idea what a struggle it was for us to have Chicago Symphony Orchestra. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just this. And same thing with lyric opera and these institutions that we hold so dear now, and we think they've always been there. And you discover through real, these stories that no, there were some incredibly dedicated people who made this happen, and they made it happen through their own sacrifice, and or their own dedication. And I think that helps connect, when people read it, and that I've been told that it helps them connect with the city and with these, the names, like John Shedd and Marshall Field and William Wrigley. They're not just names on a building or of a museum anymore. They're real people who had dreams and who failed and just got right back up and continued. And so being able to share those stories and have them resonate with people too, or like, I had no idea that Wrigley lost his fortune multiple times. In fact, that happened to a lot of the business magnates that are in Chicago's history. It's like they lost their
Yeah.
fortunes and they got them back, and they lost their fortunes. So you see these. It's not a straight line, and that's just life. Life's not a straight line.
Yeah. Yeah. And it isn't for almost any of us really,
Mhm.
but we can see that in your life, of that sort of just going with the flow and taking it as it comes sort of thing. But you were sharing with us about being a server to sort of make ends meet while you're trying to pursue your passion. And so certainly you understand that there sometimes you just have to do the thing. You have
Mhm.
to do the work to, get to do this other thing that you're really passionate about. And so, when there are challenges, and whether it be, making sure you earn enough money to survive,
Mhm.
or challenges in your relationship, or challenges in your health, you've had a number of these challenges. And when you see these challenges come along, how do you keep, and maybe even sharing with your breast cancer fight, I mean, how do you keep from hearing that news and just being like, this is it, this is the thing, this is the big C word, and this is going to be what takes all this away for me? How do you stand up to that and say, no, I'm going to decide that that's not it, that there's so much more after this?
Um. Well, I think it's important. It was important for me. I to accept, just feel it, feel the anger, feel the pain, the not the physical pain, but feel the fear and the frustration. Um, but and then to just decide, no, this is not going to define me, and it's not going to. I'm not just going to give up. And I was told, every person on my medical team, as I kept saying, attitude is the most important thing. And I've heard it, I've seen it, I've felt it, I've lived it. If you have that attitude, but it's also okay to be angry and be scared. And I had to allow myself to feel those negative feelings and be like, it's okay for me to start kicking pillow shams and just screaming profanities because I'm so frustrated.
Yeah.
And I've got the isolation from everybody was locked down, and then I've got the additional isolation, and my poor husband is dealing with this. And so it just seemed like everything was on hold. As a travel writer, my career just went last March, and my husband's a musician, and a performer, so his, business went as well. So it's like, and then we had this come up, and yeah, maybe it would have been easy or to just say, well, I guess that's it. I'm just going to give up, and but I thought, no, that's not who we are. That's not what we do. So I wrote about, and that's part of how my I came to the definition that I'm a writer, because how I processed everything, how I processed all of this, and was just to write it out. And that's what I would say. I was like, okay, I need to write this out. And sometimes I couldn't. Like when I first found out that I was going to have radiation, because I didn't think I was going to. And when I found out, I couldn't write about it at first because I couldn't dredge into those emotions and those feelings. And but then I started writing about it. And something else that helped me was I was very public from the beginning. As soon as I got my diagnosis, actually from the time I had the abnormal mammogram. But I put it out. I just wrote, and I shared it publicly on Facebook. I started writing on a different site, and it helped because the warm arms of friends, strangers, acquaintances, people I hadn't spoken to or seen in a decade, they were just, I was enveloped with kindness and love. And so I think that experience alone, I often say that I feel like I'm grateful in many ways for this, because I know, would I want to go through it? No. But because I just said, this is what I'm experiencing, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It sucks. But it's also, I'm seeing how kind people are, and how generous with their love and their affection, and they're just putting their prayers, putting their positive vibes out in the world. And I got to experience so much of that firsthand. And so I couldn't just say, well, I guess that's it, because,
Yeah.
I had a whole team of people telling me I got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that, sort of facing up to it, you know, saying what it is, calling it out. I think a lot of times when we come up against challenges, we want to pretend like it's not there. We want to pretend
Mhm.
like it's not a thing. And it's like, no, call it out, figure out what you have to do, start doing it. And then the other thing that I really like is you mentioning these partnerships, your husband partnering with you in this fight, your friends, your family. I also see that you partnered with the American Cancer Society, and that you're now choosing to donate a portion of book sales to the American Cancer
Mhm.
Society. So, can you share with us why you decided to partner with them and what they've done for you, to sort of encourage you, and just share with us, why that was important to you?
Okay. Well, they don't know unless they've seen anything I've posted on social media, but so we're not really partnered. I've just decided that I want to, because cancer was such a part of the book, because I wrote it while I was undergoing chemotherapy, or I wrote most of it, I should say, that and I had such encouragement from the team at the cancer center too, that I thought I need to give back. And I was a direct recipient of what American Cancer Society does. And part of that is the research that they fund, but it's also getting a bag with these things that a chemotherapy patient might want or need when they're undergoing chemo. And you don't you don't think about it, you don't know it. It's like
Yeah.
sugar-free candies, and a little blanket to that you can have over you when you're undergoing treatment, and just little things that you just don't think of it. You think about it, and it's just given to cancer patients to make this time a bit more bearable, and also to know that you're not alone. And things like the cancer center had a place where I could get wigs, and so the nurse navigator brought me some wigs to try, so that, and then I could, because wigs are expensive. And so that's something that, like American Cancer Society did. So I want to give back so that I can help fund what they do to, help other people in this situation. I considered possibly choosing a different cancer nonprofit every quarter. I'm still thinking about that. I know when we first, well, I say we because um, the the Friday after I had my first chemo treatment, my husband and I shaved our heads because I knew I was going to lose my hair anyway.
Yeah.
And I had long curly hair. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to wait for it to fall out because talk about demoralizing. And my hair basically kind of defined me. People would see me. It's like, oh, it's Theresa. I recognize you from your hair. Well, my husband, who is a saint, he shaved his head in, solidarity with me. And actually, his head is still bald. He's waiting until my hair grows back a little more. But we donated my hair to Wigs for Kids. So
Yeah.
there'll probably be an upcoming charity that'll. So we donated my hair, and then I also did a fundraiser. But I just feel like it's, if you can, then I want to give back in some way.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I don't tell short stories.
No, this is great. I'm just thankful that you're willing to be vulnerable and share with us because I think this is what people connect with, and I think we obviously want to celebrate people and we want to celebrate the wins, but you don't get to the wins without the challenges, without the
Hmm.
failures, and so too many times I think it's probably a product in some ways. I mean, it's always been there, but it's probably even more there with social media where you go on people's Instagram, you go on people's Facebook, and you see all the wins, and
Hmm.
sometimes personally it's like I get to a point where I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Like, why am I not
Yeah.
as successful as this other person? Why am I still here in this spot when they're there in that spot? And
Hmm.
this comparing culture that we can get stuck in, and especially with young people, with the issues with bullying that young people have to go through, and even once you think, okay, I'm doing my career, I don't have to worry about bullying anymore, and all of a sudden you still have it there. I think it's so difficult because we have such a comparing culture out there,
Hmm.
and I think it's important to hear that people have to fight to get to where they are, that people have to fail to get to where they are, because so many times I look at it and I say, man, I wish that I were doing that, or I wish I were better at that. And in reality, it's like, no, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be,
Yes.
because you may see someone who's towards the end of the fight. You may see someone who has won the battle against this or that.
Hmm.
But number one, they're probably still going through another battle. And number two, they had to go through a battle to get to that place. And
Hmm.
so I really appreciate people like yourself who come on and who say it wasn't easy, but I just decided that I had to do it, for myself, for other people, for whatever the reasons are, because they vary. But I just decided I had to do it, and I think if you can speak on that a little bit, this culture of social media where we see so many wins, we see so many highs, and we don't see the losses for you, have you experienced that in your life, or have you talked to people who experience that, and what is that like for you?
It's especially with, running a site, being a travel writer who publishes her own site. And, there's the um, expectation of being, on social media and especially Instagram. And
Hmm.
there's kind of a joke amongst travel writers about the whole, okay, they've got the woman looking away from the camera with the flowing dress with this gorgeous. And so, they just all look the same. And I thought, that's not me. That's never going to be me. But and I've struggled with the fact that I'm overweight and I know that. And I'm not, a size tiny.
Hmm.
So I didn't want to put pictures of me on on my social media on Instagram, and for my site to promote it. And I thought, if the picture isn't perfect, I was, if I did take a selfie or something, I'm taking 20 selfies, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, no, that doesn't look quite right. And oh wait, you can see that wrinkle, and oh no, you can see the way my arm is not, it's flapping or whatever. But this whole experience, when I started posting pictures of me bald and I even at one point I got shingles on my face and was right before I was getting ready to go to Alabama to teach a writing workshop. And my oncologist actually said, "Well, at least you'll be wearing a mask." I was like, "True, very true."
Yeah.
But and fortunately, it was a very mild case. So, but still, it's like I had shingles on my face, and I'm doing Instagram stories, which I'm totally inconsistent with, but um, and I didn't have the mask on, and so I looked at it later, and I feel like I owe an apology to anybody who watched it because I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got shingles on my face. It looks awful. But I also realized that people don't, they don't care. I was so worried that I didn't look perfect before all this happened. And I'm like, hey, guess what? Here I am with no eyelashes, no eyebrows, no hair. And people were kind and sweet and just like, oh, you look great. And it's like, you see the smile in the eyes, and that's all they care about.
Yeah.
So that was a really big wake up call for me, that comparing myself to, anybody else is not, that's just, it's only doing a disservice to myself.
Mm,
And when people do that, when they like, well, I'm not where that person is, you don't know what they've been through. Like you said, you don't know what their challenges are. And, maybe some people have this, it just easy all, from start to, the stratosphere or wherever they are. But you
right.
don't know it, and it's unlikely because everybody has their own struggles. And so I
Yeah.
think just knowing who you are and what you bring to the world, and acknowledging that you bring something good to the world. And if you are not sharing it, if you are not doing what you're supposed to do, then you're keeping that gift from, people who might need it.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point because I think some people think they don't have a gift, but what it really is they're just not sharing whatever gift it is
Hmm.
they have. So sometimes they don't even see it
Yeah.
because they're just not sharing it. And I think
Hmm.
one of the biggest ways to really sort of celebrate that is to share it, and then you kind of go, wow, I did that, didn't I forgot I did that thing, and then you
Hmm.
started, oh, I did that other thing too. Um and I've seen that in people where it's like, no, you're a really awesome person who did really something really crazy, good, and you need to let people know because someone else
Hmm.
wants to do that same thing but they don't think they can. um
Yeah.
and so
And
I love that.
I don't think, it doesn't, like, my husband is a much more private person than I am. Like, if he were going through this, he would never have posted any of this publicly because that's just not who he is, and he's not
Yeah.
comfortable with it. But he would share it with the people who are close to him. So when you say maybe you don't owe it to the world to share it, but I feel like you owe it to yourself to find out what it is that matters most to you, and be true to that.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, maybe your superpower is just being a really good listener, and that's an amazing superpower to have. It's different
Yeah.
for everybody, but I think everybody brings something special to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us what is in the future for Theresa Goodrich, because I think it's what you've been through and what you've done is really cool, but not cool in the way of fighting cancer. But I mean, I think it's great, what you've done, and so I want to hear about what the future
Mm.
looks like for you.
More writing, all. Well, I had previously published two travel logs, Tooling Gems Volume 1 and Tooling Gems Volume 2. And those were about epic road trips my husband and I have taken to the Pacific coast and back. And the idea was always we were going to travel the country in loops. The first one was the Southwestern loop from the Chicago area. The second one is about a Northwestern loop, and then we were going to do Northeastern and Southeastern, and then probably, North and South. Um, that What the future volumes look like is going to change because we're not sure we want to do more of these month-long adventures, but I'm going to continue this series, and telling these stories, because the idea is I'm telling the stories of of the country and small towns and places that you might not think to visit, but are definitely worth visit these Tulane gems. So that is, I'm seriously considering writing a book about my experience with cancer. I've been told by a few people that I should definitely write a book, and so I'm considering that. That's a possibility. And other than that, I mean, I'd like to dip my toes into fiction at some point. So,
Okay.
but as long as I'm writing, I'm happy. I want to keep telling the stories. I mean, I'm still have stories that I am writing for the local tourist, and then I'll have more stories. Like we actually just took the Chicago Architecture Foundation's river cruise this morning. And
Wow.
I was like, oh, I need to tell the story about that building. And I need to know what that building's, what's happened with that one. Because there's right next to Hotel Julian, it's this little tiny, squat, little narrow building. I'm like, okay, I need to know, who was the architect? When was it built? How is it still there?
Yeah.
Oh,
I have beef with Hotel Julian though. It
what?
took away I used to live kind of kitty corner to it, and it took away my view of the lake when they
Oh,
built it. I was like, who has those air rights? I want to talk to that person because now I can't see the lake anymore. Just it happens in Chicago where
yeah.
they're always building. So
Yep.
um, yeah, well, we can't wait to read some of those stories as well. I'm sure that people are going to be really interested in how to connect with you. So can you share with us all the ways that people can connect with you and learn about what you've written and where to get those books as well, and then how to stay tuned in the future?
Yay. Well, my main site is The Local Tourist, and that's where I do most of my travel writing. And then my most recent book, Living Landmarks of Chicago, and there's livinglandmarksofchicago.com, so you can find out more about the book there. But for social media, I'm at The Local Tourist everywhere. I'm not as active on some platforms, but that's my handle pretty much anywhere. And for my author site is theresaLgoodrich.com. And that's TheResal Goodrich.com. And that has my 4 books, because I also contributed to an anthology called Midwest Road Trip Adventures. So collaborated with 10 other Midwestern writers, and we shared road trips in our respective states.
Wow. Sounds so cool. We can't wait to continue to connect with you and partner with you in the future, because really cool things on the horizon. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. Thank you for your vulnerability. And, we know life isn't always easy. And so it's important to hear those things too. So we really appreciate that.
All right. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you so much. It was wonderful talking with you. And your questions are challenging.
We try and push a little bit, because we it's I think some people are like, oh, I'm going to talk about all the good stuff, but it's like,
Yeah.
it's good to share all those things. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you to our listeners for joining us for this episode, and for all our previous 3 seasons, now in our 4th season of releasing episodes. You can listen to all those episodes at www.bridgingchicago.com, and our handle is @bridgingchicago on all social media. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you again here on the Bridging Chicago podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions, and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.